to The World This Week. A stunning victory for the Conservative Party in Britain. A huge parade across Moscow's Red Square to mark the 70th anniversary of victory over Nazi Germany. Western leaders boycotted the event. In Israel, a narrow, very narrow coalition was finally formed by Prime Minister Netanyahu. And Nepal struggles to get more help as the world's attention moves elsewhere. These are some of the issues we'll touch upon this Sunday. With me this Sunday are Tal Shalev, I-24 News correspondent. Hi, Tal. And Alon Pika's former advisor to Prime Minister Ehud Barak. You look shocked.
Well, 63 million Britons are shocked, and it's my cue to be shocked too. Yes, I think everyone was shocked.
Yeah.
Everyone who followed.
Why? What happened?
The polling models apparently were either not done correctly, or the entire methodology needs to be revised in a way that's different from Israel in terms of the electorate, but similar in the way that the polling got two successive elections, one in Israel, one in Britain, completely wrong.
Okay, so you have the same government, conservative government, the same David Cameron, more of the same?
More of the same in terms of foreign policy, yes. I think more of the same in terms of domestic policy, yes, even though the austerity has to be revised. Well, I expect it to be revised, austerity.
Tell, at least in Jerusalem, there were smiles.
There was a big relief in Jerusalem. Netanyahu is very happy to have Cameron return to Downing 10. There was concern that Miliband would take over, and definitely these results are good for Netanyahu. And look, also, basically, very similar similarities are striking, both in the strategy, the fear tactics, the scare tactics, both in the result, which predicted all of the, overrided all of the predictions, and also in the future. Both Netanyahu and Cameron at the moment are going to rule with a very tiny majority. Cameron's life will probably be easier than Netanyahu's, but these two, Netanyahu calls Cameron one of his best allies. They're kind of BFFs, so Netanyahu is definitely satisfied with these results.
All right. Meanwhile, there's, we are far from American presidential elections, but Republicans are pouring in.
Yeah, there's the ever-growing Republicans running for president club, and every week we get 3 new joiners to this club.
Except for the president of the club.
Except for the president of the club, who hasn't joined yet, but it's basically by the hour, almost every day. And it's becoming a very interesting race. This week we had Carly Fiorina join, we have Mike Huckabee join, and we also have Ben Carson join. And we're still waiting for another. We still know about at least a dozen more who are planning and haven't really just formally announced yet. So definitely the Republican race is growing bigger and bigger, but many of these candidates are just, they're a long shot for getting the ticket. It just does have an impact. It will have an impact on the margins. This could have impact on the main candidates who at the moment seem to be Marco Rubio, Rand Paul, Jeb Bush, who hasn't announced yet, and Ted Cruz.
He will announce, will he?
Yeah, I would imagine.
No doubt about that.
I think that if the Republicans want a fair shot at winning the elections, by the way, against the demographic odds in America, but if they do want a shot at winning the elections, they will have to move to the center as early as the primaries rather than the general elections, because that pattern of going to your base for the primaries and coming back to the center doesn't work anymore.
There's some criticism already that Jeb Bush is taking too much time to decide.
Yeah, but I think this is a strategy issue. He's waiting for the right time, not to be just another of this wolf pack that's running basically nowhere. If they do want to win the elections, I'm not advising them, they have only 2 viable candidates. Jeb Bush is one, and another one who hasn't announced yet, but his intentions are becoming clear, is the current governor of Ohio, John Kasich. Mm-hmm. He can win a general election. Everyone else, at this point, it's very early, at this point, everyone else in the GOP field, I don't think has a shot of winning the general elections.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
A stunning victory for David Cameron and the Conservative Party in Britain. We are joined now from London by Dr. Alan Mendoza, a member of the Conservative Party. Thank you very much for speaking with us.
Thank you.
Well, unfortunately, I cannot congratulate you on a win in your district, but your party did very well, above all expectations. How surprised were you?
Well, I think, in fact, my district had a sort of a whiff of this because we actually achieved the biggest percentage increase in the Conservative share of vote in all of London. And that in itself was not so much a surprise to me because I'd seen the factoring over the course of the campaign, but it kind of reflected what I thought might happen nationally, but it was a hope. I mean, I think all the odds had been suggesting we'd be in hung parliament territory, and we were very much in hope territory that it was going to be the actual victory. It turned out it has been.
Do you have any explanation as to the huge difference between the public opinion polls and the results finally?
Yes, I think it shows the weakness of the polling system in a party system now that has 4 or 5 national parties competing within it. When you've got that kind of complexity and people being very uncertain about how they're going to vote until perhaps the last few days, it's not surprising the polls are out in this way. And this is not uncommon. You've seen it in the Israeli elections. You've seen it actually in the past in other elections in other countries. But it may be that the polling system is completely broken as we know it here in the UK.
When you see the barrage of party leaders' resignations, what's your reactions to that?
Well, I think what we have here is a resounding victory for the Conservatives, and I think it comes back to, in a sense, a previous question. Yes, there are lots of parties, but when it came down to it, when people had to make their decision in the polling booth, with the exception of Scotland, which is a separate case, people across the UK voted for stability, they voted for economic progress, they voted for a party that wanted to give them economic aspiration going forwards. Now, when you look at the record and the result, it's not a surprise the other party leaders immediately decided they had to resign. The Labour Party has sunk to a new low in terms of what it's done. They've been locked out of Scotland by their own ineptitude. They failed to take the seats in England they wanted to. Their message, which was very left-wing, has been resoundingly rejected. The Liberal Democrats have been crushed. From having been a party of government, they're now down to 8 seats. It's an extraordinary turnaround. It is unsurprising that Nick Clegg had to resign as a result of that as well. And UKIP also failed to break through in the way that they had hoped they would. Yes, they did get votes in various places across the country, but they didn't get seats, and as a result, Nigel Farage honoured his own pledge to resign. But it all comes down to the fact this has been a tremendous night for the Conservatives and for the Conservative vision for the country.
What is the next Cameron government going to be like?
Well, we will know that very, very soon indeed, because the reshuffle is taking place, as I understand it, even as we are speaking right now. So in the next couple of hours, 2-3 hours, we will know a little more about the way this government is going to convey itself. And I think you need to look at who gets placed in key ministries to understand. Now, the Prime Minister's already said he wants to govern as a one-nation Conservative and indeed to look at making the party a party for working people in terms of rewarding them for work. I think that's going to be seen in the first Queen's speech. You're going to see a very expansive set of programmes and, of course, the carrying out of the commitments in our manifesto. So I'd expect to see the tax changes that we promised, the inheritance tax issue changed. I think we would see also the NHS spending coming into that. Lots of different policies that we have now promised and we're now in a position to actually put into practice. And I think it's a very exciting time in Britain today.
You have spoken about Middle East policies. Are we going to see more of the same from the next government?
Well, I think when it comes to Middle East policies, the Conservative Party at least has been uniformly excellent on this. There's been a commitment to obviously stopping Iran from developing its nuclear program. On Israel and the Palestinians, there has been a fairness that's been lacking from other parties in this way. I think there is a willingness and indeed an ability now to tackle ISIS in all its forms. I think, in short, what we have seen, the logjam in foreign policy we've seen in the last few years, I hope will now be unblocked, and I'd be very interested to see who gets put in as Defence Secretary and indeed Foreign Secretary as well.
Dr. Alan Mendoza from the Conservative Party, I thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, U.S.-Israeli relations from the perspective of J Street, the liberal advocacy group in Washington. With us is J Street President Jeremy Ben-Ami. Thank you. We're glad to have you here in the studio.
Wonderful to be here. Thanks.
Let me take you back to the election campaign in Israel. During this campaign, you have launched a controversial campaign of your own, saying Netanyahu does not speak for all Jews. And, like organizations like ADL called this campaign inflammatory and repugnant, and many did not like it. Can you explain why?
Sure. The campaign was related to the speech that the Prime Minister came to the Congress to give. And in the context of that speech, he said he's coming to Washington to speak for all Jews. And our campaign was, Bibi doesn't speak for me. It is one of the big misconceptions in Washington that the Prime Minister is the representative of everybody around the world. There's only one opinion. And what we try to make clear in Washington is that there are many arguments and many points of view on these key issues.
But I think it was the first time that a Jewish organization, a major Jewish organization, parted this way with an Israeli prime minister. Do you think it was understood in Washington and elsewhere in America?
Oh, I think very much so. I think that the concept in the United States that you have multiple points of view in the U.S., but you still love the U.S., is very clearly understood. And the question in Washington has been, how is it possible that we're not hearing from the Jewish Americans who don't agree with what the Prime Minister is saying and doing? We know they're out there. Why don't we hear from them? So I think it was not a surprise, and I don't think it's a problem.
And no reservation doing this during a political campaign, an election campaign in Israel at the time?
If the Prime Minister had no reservation about coming to Washington 3 weeks before his campaign and turning the speech into a campaign ad, we have no reservation about responding.
Do you think that the Iran deal, as it looks now, is a good one?
Well, first of all, there is still a lot to be negotiated. What exactly are the terms of the inspections? What is the exact method for removing the sanctions? There's some misunderstandings and some questions, and those need to be answered before you can say, is it a good deal or not? If you have a deal that significantly limits Iran's capacity to enrich, that has very, very intrusive and serious inspections, and only removes the sanctions if they perform what they say they're supposed to do, that would be a good deal. So we need to see the fine print.
Right. But you know that in Israeli politics, there's almost a consensus that it's a bad deal, and looks like even Netanyahu's opponents agree now that he was maybe right to ring the bells. So maybe he did not speak for all Jews, but he did probably speak for most Israelis.
I understand the fear. I understand the sense that this is much, much closer at hand for Israelis than it is for Americans. But I also think that we, as Americans, and if there is a deal, those who support that deal have an obligation to try to explain the deal and to say, of all the possible options, that this actually is the best way to ensure that Iran doesn't get a nuclear weapon. And that's the obligation on those of us who will support the deal, if it's a good one, to make it clear that it is, in fact, the best option.
When you look at the Obama administration's record in the Middle East, Egypt and Syria and Libya and ISIS and more, many Israelis doubt, if he can really pull anything serious here in the Middle East. Do you?
No, and I also think that the events that happen in the Middle East are not the result of the Obama policies. The events that happen here are very difficult to respond to. He, in my opinion, as a president, is assessing each case by case. Libya is different from Egypt, is different from Syria, is different from Iran.
Well, it's not a result of his policies, but you said correctly, the response. Was the response one that can, give anybody around here confidence that the United States is playing a role?
Well, I don't know that there are good answers. That may not be an acceptable or good answer either, but this is a very, very difficult situation. Each country is its own problem. Take Iraq, where the Bush administration went in with military force to get rid of Saddam Hussein. I would say that turned out to be a very bad idea. Many of the problems that we see today in Iraq and in Syria, perhaps even the birth of ISIS, are a direct result of the incorrect use of force at the wrong moment by the United States. The question is, what is the best way to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon?
What's next for Netanyahu and Obama's? Will they be able to rebuild relationships?
Well, I think that you will see them focused on what they leave behind. And I think that that leads directly to the question of an American plan, an Obama set of parameters, perhaps something at the United Nations that says, after 8 years of our efforts, George Mitchell, John Kerry, John Allen, you name it, here's what we think, and leaving that on the table as a marker for the future and a legacy for the administration. That's about the extent of what I would
and
imagine.
We'll talk about it, of course, later. Thank you very much, Jeremy Ben-Ami, for joining us.
Thank you.
And this has been The World This Week. We'll see you here next Sunday. Have a great week.